The dusty wooden platform creaked beneath the trembling feet of the little girl named Lila, her small hands clutching the hem of her faded dress as a harsh summer wind swept across the open auction yard, lifting strands of her tangled brown hair and brushing dust against her tear-streaked cheeks. She had been standing there for hours, watching families come and go, watching other children, stronger, healthier, louder, get chosen, bought, adopted, taken away to lives she could only imagine, while she remained invisible, a thin, quiet shadow no one seemed to want. And as the sun dipped low over the prairie horizon, she finally whispered shakily, "No one wants to adopt me," only for the whisper to break into a sob that wrenched her small shoulders. The auction master, a burly man with a worn hat and little patience, tapped his clipboard and shouted to the thinning crowd, "All right, folks, last chance of the day. One more child left. She's quiet but smart, doesn't cause trouble. Someone take her home." But the people looked at her the way they looked at old furniture, eyes scanning briefly, judging her thinness, her timid posture, her almost fragile presence, and they turned away, shaking their heads, muttering, "Too small, too weak, too scared." And each rejection cut her deeper than the last, until she stopped hoping altogether. She hugged her elbows, wishing she could curl into herself and disappear, wishing she could just wake up in a warm room with a mother's soft voice calling her name, wishing she could be loved just once. But life had taught her early that wishing was dangerous, because it made the disappointment hurt more. A heavy silence hung over the dusty yard until a slow, rhythmic clop of hooves echoed from the entrance. Everyone turned as a tall figure on a dark stallion approached, the sun setting behind him and turning him into a silhouette. Carved out of fire and shadow, the stranger dismounted with quiet confidence, tall boots hitting the dirt, long coat brushing against his legs. And when he removed his hat, the crowd murmured in recognition. This was Cade Walker, the richest rancher across 3 counties, known for his booming cattle empire, his unshakable grit, and the tragedy he never spoke about. A wife and unborn child lost years ago in a storm that left his heart colder than winter steel. Cade wasn't the type to show up at a children's auction. He avoided these places because they reminded him too much of what he'd lost. But today, his horse had insisted on turning down this dirt road, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't fight it. The auction master straightened immediately, eager for a high-paying bidder. "Mr. Walker? Sir, didn't expect you today. Looking for extra hands? We have farm boys available, but already sold most. Only this girl left." Cade's eyes, sharp as a hawk's yet softened by something unspoken, shifted toward Lila. She felt tiny under his gaze, like she didn't deserve to even breathe the same air. But instead of turning away like the others, he stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel, and knelt before her so he could look her in the eyes. "What's your name?" he asked, voice low but warm in a way she hadn't heard in years. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a squeak. "Lila, sir." Cade studied her, her bruised knees, her dirt-smudged face, the fear she wore like a second skin, and something inside his chest shifted, painfully, as if an old wound stirred and sighed. "How old are you?" he asked. 8, I think," she whispered, eyes glued to the ground, because she was afraid of seeing rejection in his face. Before he even said the words, the auction master interrupted impatiently. "She ain't strong, Mr. Walker, but she's quiet. Won't cause you any problems. I'll give a discount if—" Cade raised a hand, silencing him instantly, then turned back to the girl. "Why are you crying?" he asked gently. Lila's small body trembled, and she wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Because no one wants me. They all chose other kids. I'm always the one left behind." Her voice cracked, and she tried to hold the rest in, but the grief was too big. Tears spilled freely, her little chest heaving, as she clutched herself, like she needed to keep from breaking apart. Cade felt something twist deep within him, an echo of the day he'd buried his wife, the day he'd buried his future. Yet hearing this tiny girl say no, one wanted her, struck a place in him he thought had died. He spoke softly, almost to himself. No child should feel unwanted. Then, louder, steady, "Look at me, Lila." She hesitated but lifted her eyes, and Cade saw it. Strength beneath fear, fire beneath ashes. A soul that had been stepped on yet still, glowed faintly with hope she didn't dare admit. Something inside him clicked into place, clear as a sunrise. He rose to his full height, turned to the auction master, and said 3 words that made the man blink in shock. "I'll take her," Lila gasped, not believing she'd heard correctly, her small hands flying to her mouth as Cade signed the papers without bargaining, without question, paying more than anyone would have asked, because he wasn't buying a worker, he was rescuing a child. When he knelt again and extended his hand, Lila stared at it, confused, as if afraid it would vanish. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you home." She placed her small, trembling hand into his large, weathered one, and for the first time in years, she felt warmth, real warmth, not from the sun, but from a hand that didn't push her away. Cade lifted her onto his horse, settling her carefully in front of him, and she clung to his coat as if afraid this miracle would dissolve. As they rode away from the auction yard, the place that had nearly broken her, Lila felt the wind on her face, felt his protective arm around her, felt something blooming in her chest she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. People in the yard watched in stunned silence, whispers spreading like wildfire. Cade Walker adopted a little girl? Why that one? What's he planning? But Cade ignored them. He focused only on the fragile child in his arms. She whispered timidly, "Mr. Why did you choose me?" Cade tightened his hold just slightly, voice rough with emotion he hadn't let out in years. "Because no one should ever cry that they're unwanted. Not while I'm alive." And with the sky blazing orange above them, the rancher and the little girl rode toward a future neither knew how badly they needed, one that would test them, heal them, and ultimately save both their lives. As the landscape stretched before them, wide and endless, Lila dared to breathe fully for the first time, and in that breath was the beginning of a new story, one she never believed she'd get, a story where she mattered, where she belonged, and where someone finally wanted her. And for viewers following this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because Chapter 2 will take this emotional transformation to an entirely new level. And you won't want to miss what happens when danger rises, secrets unfold, and Cade realizes saving Lila might be the very thing that saves him too. The sun had barely risen over the rolling Texas plains when Cade Walker gently lifted the sleepy Lila from the saddle and carried her across the front porch of his vast ranch house, a place built from stone, sweat, and years of loneliness. And as she rubbed her eyes and took in the world around her, she saw something she had never seen before: safety, silence without fear, a home untouched by cruelty. Inside, the ranch smelled of leather, firewood, and old memories. Thick beams ran across the ceiling, and a large fireplace glowed quietly in the corner. But what caught Cade's attention was the way Lila froze just inside the doorway, her small shoulders tensing, her breath quickening, as if she expected someone to shout at her, drag her out, punish her for stepping somewhere she didn't belong. Cade noticed instantly and knelt beside her, his voice low and steady. "You're safe here. Lila, you don't have to ask permission to breathe." She blinked rapidly, confusion and disbelief battling. Inside her chest, no adult had ever spoken to her like that, and she whispered, "Are you sure I can stay?" Cade swallowed hard, remembering his wife's soft voice, saying they would have a house full of children one day, and he nodded firmly. "Yes, you're home." She walked slowly through the living room, fingertips grazing wooden shelves full of old photographs, trophies, horse ribbons, and small pieces of a life once full of love. She paused at a picture of Cade with a glowing woman holding her pregnant belly, and Lila's voice softened. She was beautiful. Cade's breath caught, a storm of grief flickering behind his eyes, but he managed a small nod. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me." Lila didn't know how to comfort someone like him, but she reached out and gently touched his sleeve, a small gesture that somehow held more compassion than anything he'd felt in years. The day unfolded quietly, with Cade showing her the ranch where the horses grazed, where the cattle roamed, where the sunsets painted the fields in gold, and Lila absorbing every detail with wide-eyed wonder, asking soft questions about animals, barns, saddles, and whether the stars really looked brighter here. As the hours passed, Cade found himself speaking more than he expected, teaching her how to whistle for a horse, how to hold a bucket, how to pat a mare's neck without spooking her. And each time she learned something new, she looked up at him with shy pride, as if desperate to prove she was worth keeping. But just as Lila began to relax into the warmth of this new world, shadows from her past crept back into the edges of her mind. Every time Cade raised his hand to adjust his hat, she flinched. Every time a door creaked, she tensed. And when a ranch hand accidentally dropped a metal bucket and it clattered loudly, she gasped and backed against the wall. Trembling so violently, Cade's heart nearly shattered. He guided her gently outside, away from the noise, letting her breathe, letting the wind calm her tiny, shaking body. "Nobody will hurt you here," he whispered. But she didn't believe him fully, not yet, because trust was a fragile thing, easily broken and painfully slow to rebuild. That night, Cade prepared a small room for her, the room he had once built for the baby he never got to meet. Soft blue blankets, toys still untouched, a rocking chair in the corner. He hesitated before opening the door, wondering if showing her this would reopen wounds he had long tried to bury. But when Lila stepped inside, her eyes widened and then filled with tears. Is this mine?" she whispered, her voice breaking like a tiny glass shard. Cade nodded, his own throat tight. It was waiting for someone special. Lila walked to the bed, touched the pillow, then suddenly rushed back to Cade, wrapping her thin arms around his waist and burying her face against his coat as she sobbed. Sobs not of pain now, but disbelief, relief, gratitude so fierce it tore through her like a storm. Cade carefully placed his calloused hand on the back of her head, letting her cry, letting her pour out years of silent suffering. And he realized then that adopting her wasn't charity, it was fate. But peace is a luxury the world rarely allows for long, and as the days passed, the ranch hands began noticing strangers, riding the borders of the property, dark silhouettes watching from a distance before disappearing into the brush. Cade brushed off the concerns at first, assuming they were drifters or cattle thieves scouting for weakness. But one evening, just after sunset, he found boot prints near the barn, fresh ones, too deep to be from ranch hands, and his gut twisted. Someone was looking for something, or someone. Meanwhile, Lila was beginning to flourish in small ways. She laughed more, smiled more, learned the names of every horse on the property, and even started humming softly when she thought no one was listening. But she also carried secrets, scars that went deeper than bruises, memories she hadn't yet learned how to speak about. One night Cade heard her scream from her room, a gut-wrenching, terrified cry, and he raced to her, finding her curled into a ball, shaking violently as she begged, Don't take me back, please don't let them find me." Cade wrapped her in his arms, whispering, "I won't let anyone take you, ever." But the words lodged in his throat, because the stranger prints outside, the hovering riders, the feeling of being watched, they all pointed to one chilling possibility. Someone from her past wanted her back, and not for kind reasons. As Lila clung to him, tears soaking his shirt, Cade made a silent vow in the dark. He would burn the world before he let anyone hurt her again. From that night on, Cade doubled security around the ranch, armed the ranch hands, and kept Lila close wherever he went, all while pretending to her that everything was fine. But the truth was growing clearer. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Something dangerous was coming, something tied to the terrified way Lila shook at night, something connected to the cruel voices she sometimes begged to stop in her sleep. Cade knew he had saved her life at the auction, but now he feared that decision had placed a target on her back. And for those watching, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because the story is about to take a dark turn. Secrets will surface, enemies will come hunting, and Cade will soon discover that saving Lila isn't just a choice. It is the fight of his life.